Greetings. Around 1274 BC, near the city of Kadesh, located on the Orontes River, a monumental battle took place between two of the most powerful states of that time, the Hittite kingdom and Egypt. This battle is one of the few in ancient history that is well documented in sources from both the Hittites and the Egyptians. Among the Egyptian sources, two main ones stand out: the so-called Poem of Pentor and brief inscriptions, known in scholarship as the Bulletin or Records. The so-called Poem of Pentor is not actually a poem, but a detailed report of the campaign, which favorably describes the deeds of Ramesses II. The text of the poem is found on the walls of Ramesses II's mortuary temple, in the temples of Amun at Luxor and Karnak, as well as in the temple of Osiris at Abydos. The term bulletin, or record, refers to long explanatory captions accompanying reliefs depicting the battle. These inscriptions are located in the aforementioned temples, as well as in the rock-cut temple dedicated to Ramesses II at Abu Simbel. It is known that the Battle of Kadesh was one of several battles between Egypt and the Hittites, fought as part of the struggle for control over the lands of Palestine and the Levant, territories both world powers claimed. We know that the battle took place in the 5th year of Pharaoh Ramesses II's reign. However, the problem is that the exact dates of Ramesses' reign are not known, so you may encounter different datings for the battle, ranging from 1269 to 1300 BC. I have chosen one of these dates, 1274 BC, but it should be remembered that this date is highly tentative. The city of Kadesh was located on the border between the spheres of influence of Egypt and the Hittites. The immediate cause that prompted the Egyptian pharaoh to launch a campaign against Kadesh was that after the accession of Ramesses II, the rulers of Kadesh refused to pay tribute to Egypt and thus failed to fulfill their vassal obligations. Moreover, they began to align themselves with the Hittites. This posed a threat to Egypt's vassal principalities and its influence in the eastern Mediterranean. As a result, the Egyptian pharaoh began preparations for war. In late April 1274 BC, the Egyptian army set out from the border fortress of Jarrah and began its northern campaign, moving along the coastline. The army was accompanied by a fleet sailing along the shore. The Egyptians then turned inland toward Syria, reaching the Orontes River Valley, where Kadesh was situated. After a month of marching, the Egyptians set up camp on the heights south of Kadesh, within a day's march of the city. Not far from Kadesh, the Hittite army was already stationed. So, what did the opposing armies consist of? Ramesses II brought with him about 20,000 soldiers, divided into 4 roughly equal-sized corps: Amun, led by the pharaoh himself, and the corps of Ra, Ptah, and Set. The Egyptian army during the New Kingdom period was a formidable force. Previously, the main component of the army had consisted of militia, called up only in times of war. However, during this era, a professional army was established, comprising infantry and war chariots. Among the mercenaries, there were several categories. The most notable were the so-called Shurden, who were recruited into the pharaoh's personal guard. The Shurden were one of the sea peoples who had invaded Egypt and Palestine. It is worth noting that the most famous of the sea peoples were the Philistines, mentioned in the Bible. The Shurden are identified with the Sardinians, who inhabited the island of Sardinia A distinctive feature of their weaponry was their long, sharp swords, which, unlike Egyptian swords, were designed for thrusting. They were easy to distinguish from others because their helmets featured horns placed on either side. Among the foreign mercenaries in the Egyptian army, there were also Nubian and Libyan archers. The Nubians used arrows with barbed tips, which were very difficult to remove from the body. The distinguishing feature of the Libyans was a feather stuck in their hair, which served as decoration. While Nubians could be employed for independent tasks, the Libyans acted as an effective auxiliary force in the Egyptian army. The Egyptian infantry was equipped in a variety of ways. In the New Kingdom army, we find both traditional but highly modernized types of weapons, as well as entirely new kinds. Among the traditional weapons, one notable example is the mace, which received a second life. During the New Kingdom period, this deadly weapon was significantly improved by adding a curved blade integrated into the hard wooden head. This axe mace was wielded with two hands, delivering blows of tremendous force, capable of piercing even the strongest bronze armor. The traditional spear was also improved. The Egyptians learned to forge bronze spearheads with a hollow socket that tightly fitted onto the wooden shaft. This weapon had a dual purpose. It could be used as a close combat spear or thrown at enemy chariots and troops. It is important to note that the spearheads were equipped with diamond-shaped metal blades, which had armor-piercing capabilities. Soldiers carried a quiver of spears on their shoulders. Unlike arrows, these weapons were reusable, and as the Egyptian forces advanced, they could retrieve their thrown spears. The battle axe was also redesigned. During the Middle Kingdom, axe blades were semicircular or sickle-shaped and intended for delivering deep, cutting blows to unprotected flesh. However, by the time of the New Kingdom, when Egypt faced Hittite and Syrian armies wearing leather tunics reinforced with iron plates, the axe blades became narrower and straighter, suitable for piercing armor. A true wonder weapon was the bronze Kadesh sword. It was entirely cast from bronze, and its handle was then wrapped in leather and fabric. This eliminated the need for rivets connecting the handle to the blade, significantly increasing the sword's durability and striking power. The Kadesh was a highly curved, sickle-shaped sword. The blade was 50 to 60 centimeters long and weighed around 2 kilograms. Strikes with this sword were delivered from the outer curved side. The Kadesh caused horrific wounds, amputated limbs, and could penetrate both wooden shields and bronze armor. No less, if not more significant, was the appearance of the composite bow. Its killing range reached 250 to 300 meters, and it could release each arrow in less than 2 seconds. This provided it with a rate of fire and an effective shooting range comparable to firearms. It is no surprise that, on the battlefield, this weapon proved to be extremely effective. However, it should be noted that not everyone had access to it. It was used only by chariot archers and a small part of the infantry. The majority of the infantry, Nubians and Libyans, were still armed with older weapons. The main force of the army consisted of chariots, the tanks of the ancient world. A chariot was a wooden platform, 1 by 0.5 meters, mounted on 2 wheels, with a yoke securely attached. The front and sides of the chariot were covered with leather, protecting the legs of the crew from arrows. 2 horses were harnessed to the chariot. The chariot was operated by 2 people, a driver, who controlled the horses with reins, and an archer. The wheels were placed at the back, making Egyptian chariots light and maneuverable. The protective armor improved as well. In addition to a shield, the warrior wore a helmet and a leather cuirass reinforced with bronze plates. The most complex protective armor was designed for the chariot crew, both the driver and the archer, as they were considered far more valuable than a simple infantryman. The armor could contain more than 600 individual scales attached to a linen or leather base. An image of Pharaoh Ramesses II can help illustrate the Egyptian chariot at the moment when he led his forces in a counterattack against the Hittite war chariots that were attacking the Ammon camp. The chariot, drawn by 2 stallions, was driven by the Pharaoh's personal charioteer, Miol. The Pharaoh wears long, knee-length scale armor. The axle, located at the rear of the chariot, along with the widely spaced wheels, created a very small turning radius, allowing for rapid maneuvering, which was crucial in the battle tactics used by the Egyptian army. In the Egyptian army, chariots and infantry were 2 distinct branches of the military, meaning that infantry was a significant combat force on its own, independent of the chariots. However, in the Hittite army, chariots represented the primary combat force, and infantry was considered more of an auxiliary branch, primarily tasked with supporting the chariots. The design of the Hittite chariot differed from the Egyptian one. In the Hittite chariot, the axle ran through the center, and it was strong enough to carry 3 people. The crew consisted of the charioteer, a heavily armed spearman, and a shield-bearer who protected the spearmen. As you can imagine, in direct combat, Egyptian chariots were unable to withstand a direct strike from the Hittite chariots. However, Egyptian chariots were much more maneuverable and stronger in combat at long distances. A disadvantage of the Hittite chariots was their heavier load, which resulted in less stability, causing them to often overturn at high speeds. A significant number of Hittite chariots were put out of action at Kadesh because, after losing their offensive momentum, they became easy targets for Egyptian chariot archers. The Hittite infantry was armed with iron swords and spears with iron tips. Nearly half of the infantrymen were archers. At first glance, a significant advantage of the Hittites was that they were armed with iron weapons, unlike the Egyptians, who were still in the Bronze Age. However, this was only a potential advantage, as the Egyptian bronze weapons were almost equal to the Hittite iron ones in effectiveness. Unlike the Egyptians, whose army was more uniform, the Hittite army was more diverse and included not only Hittites, but also militias from 19 allied principalities and cities. The Hittite army was comparable in size to the Egyptian one, with 17,000 soldiers and 2,500 chariots. Both armies had a unified command structure, and both commanders were, to put it mildly, outstanding military leaders. The Hittite army was led by King Muatali II, who, judging by his actions in the battle, was a very capable commander. The Egyptian army was commanded by Pharaoh Ramesses II, a truly remarkable figure. To begin with, he came to power at the age of 20 and reigned for an unprecedented 66 years. In the Battle of Kadesh, he not only proved himself to be a capable military leader, but also demonstrated exceptional bravery. So, how did the battle unfold? As I mentioned earlier, in May 1274 B.C., the Ammon Corps approached the city of Kadesh. The Hittite army had already set up camp in the vicinity of Kadesh. As they approached the city, Ramesses II captured 2 Hittite spies from the Shasu people, an ally of the Hittites. They informed the Egyptians that the Hittite king and his army were far from Kadesh, in Aleppo, supposedly staying there out of fear of the Pharaoh. Therefore, the soldiers of the Ammon Corps, without rushing, set up camp on the heights south of Kadesh, just a day's march from the city. Crossing the Orontes River took much longer than expected. It was only when the Egyptians reached Kadesh that they received the unpleasant news. The Hittite army was nearby, in the vicinity of Kadesh. How did this happen? Whether Egyptian scouts discovered the Hittites themselves, or they captured new prisoners, or perhaps the Hittite spies, unable to withstand harsh interrogation, finally revealed the truth. The sources differ. What is known is that Ramesses II, upon hearing the news, held an urgent council and sent messengers to hasten the arrival of the Set and Ta corps, but it was already too late. The Hittite chariots, having crossed the Orontes River, struck a devastating blow against the Ra corps. The Egyptians, heading north to the camp where the Ammon corps was stationed, were caught on the march. The sudden attack by the Hittite chariots caught the Egyptian Ra corps off guard, and they began a rapid retreat toward the main Egyptian camp. The Hittite chariots pursued the fleeing soldiers and broke into the ranks of the still disorganized Ammon corps. Pharaoh Ramesses II found himself surrounded by enemies. However, instead of finishing off the Egyptians, the Hittites began looting the Egyptian camp, thus giving the Egyptians a brief respite. At this critical moment, Ramesses II displayed remarkable composure and personal courage, personally leading the remaining soldiers in a breakout. However, the attempt to strike westward and break through to the sea was unsuccessful. But at this point, help arrived for the Pharaoh. Sources report that a detachment of Egyptians, not part of the four corps, joined the Pharaoh's forces. These soldiers had been landed from Egyptian ships, which had arrived as reinforcements. Other sources suggest that these troops were from the garrison of the city of Amurru, located along the Hittite-Egyptian border, and previously stationed there. It is possible that both of these units came to the Pharaoh's aid. In any case, it doesn't matter who they were. The important thing is that the Egyptians received significant reinforcements. The newly reinforced Egyptian detachment struck westward, heading toward the Orontes River, and here the Egyptians were successful. The Hittites were pressed against the banks of the Orontes. Even the reinforcements sent to the battlefield by the Hittite commander could not save the situation. He had ordered 1,000 additional chariots to be ferried across the Orontes. This seemingly logical decision, however, turned out to be a mistake. The terrain was uneven and unsuitable for a chariot attack. The chariots got stuck in ravines and ditches, and there were simply too many of them. The powerful strike failed, and the chariots became clogged in a confined space. In contrast, the Egyptian chariots performed excellently. They had no intention of breaking through the enemy's front. The archers on the Egyptian chariots began a deadly barrage on the Hittite chariot crews. The archers fired continuously, while the Egyptian chariots only moved as much as necessary to find the best positions for their archers. The final defeat of the Hittites came with the arrival of the Ta corps, which had finally reached the battlefield. Almost surrounded, the Hittites fled. Many of them abandoned their chariots and swam across the Orontes to escape to safety. After gathering his forces, Ramesses II realized that continuing the battle was impossible, and began the retreat toward Damascus, ultimately returning to Egypt. Naturally, a victory over the Hittites was proclaimed in Egypt. However, we are unlikely to agree with such an assessment. The main objective of the campaign, capturing Kadesh, was not achieved. On the other hand, the Hittite army was thoroughly demoralized, and Muwatalli also chose not to continue the battle. But, as expected, the Hittites also declared victory. How can we assess the results of the battle? Undoubtedly, the Battle of Kadesh was a personal victory for Pharaoh Ramesses II, who managed to save his army and prevent its defeat under the most difficult circumstances. The army was saved by the unyielding courage of its leader and the exceptional military talent of the Pharaoh. However, strategically, it was still a victory for the Hittites. They succeeded in holding Kadesh and continued to exert pressure on the border cities and the small Syrian principalities. However, the Battle of Kadesh did not mark the end of the war. It continued for another 15 years. Ultimately, in 1258 BC, the Egyptians and the Hittites concluded a peace treaty that effectively confirmed the war's indecisive outcome. This treaty was originally inscribed on silver tablets so that each side would have its own copy. Notably, archaeologists have discovered both the ancient Egyptian and Hittite versions of the treaty. A clay copy was found in the Hittite capital, Hattusa, and is now housed in the Archaeological Museum of Istanbul and the State Museum in Berlin, Germany. The Egyptian version was inscribed on the walls of two temples, the mortuary temple of Ramesses II and the temple of Amun in Karnak. This treaty is the oldest known international agreement and the oldest peace treaty whose exact details are known. By the way, one of the copies of this treaty is displayed at the United Nations headquarters as a reminder of the importance of peace.